so don't forget. Oh gosh. Because once you share your screen, you can't start the recording. It has to be the other way around. All right. What was I looking up? Oh, the syllabus. Let's see. So today we're still one day behind. Tuesday, we'll go over Lucretius and Ovid. I don't know. We may just not have it Thursday. Usually, the last day of class we don't actually meet, so that would mean that the last quiz would cover Virgil and Lucretius, unless Virgil's on the thing already. I don't think I did Virgil this time, so it'll be Virgil next on the last quiz, and Lucretius and Ovid. So these two periods. That's enough. And I'll try to get it up online earlier in the week rather than wait to the end. But it'll just be a regular quiz. It won't be a course-long thing of any sort. All right, any more questions? Oh, wrong class. Let's see. Let's go to the epics. Okay, we already talked about it's always Rome. Oh. Okay, so let's talk about Virgil. What were his dates? About 70 BC to 19 BC. And he's one of the great poets of all time, arguably maybe the greatest poet of all time. We read him continually from the time he penned these works of his until about 100 years ago when we stopped learning Latin. If you learn Latin, at some point you're going to read Virgil, because that's one reason you learn Latin. He wrote, at the end of, do we have his, no, okay. Gaius Maecenas was his original patron, and this has to do with the technology of book production. Remember how vastly expensive books are, and so not many people can own a book. If you're an institution, maybe a wealthy institution or a wealthy individual, most people, it's way out of their reach. And so as an artist, you try to glob onto a patron who will fund your work, and your stuff will be written primarily with an eye to pleasing them. Although you can give readings of works, as this was. It's very musical kind of poetry. And he would, he would get invited over to the emperors for supper, and after supper he would read some of his lines he'd been writing. But you could, your poetry might be more accessible in the form of these readings than through the book itself. Most people not being able to afford a book or being able to read, but you could understand this. Anyway, at some point he got booted off his land, so Octavian could give his farm to a returning soldier. They were trying to find something to do with these returning soldiers that would, that'd be handy, but they wouldn't be, they didn't need as many soldiers as they had. So they're trying to do something with the vets. But Gaius Maecenas knew the emperor and was able to get Virgil in to see him. He appealed, the loss of his land, and I think that rather than getting his old land back, the emperor gave him some new land. But that's okay because he mostly made his money off of writing poetry. And here are the poems that he wrote. The first thing he wrote were the eclogues, which is pastoral poetry, and that has to do with shepherds and shepherdesses and stuff like that. The second thing he wrote were the Georgics, which have, Georgos is the Greek word for farmer. And so the Georgics had to do with farming. The final thing that he wrote was his epic, and it's about, war and other stuff. And it's seen as his greatest work, and he was writing it when he died. He was with the emperor, they were on a trip, and he ordered that his work be destroyed. Octavian said, delay that order, and he had the work edited, and the committee could strike lines, but they could not add lines. And so we have a rather abrupt ending. Perhaps there was a coda at the end. And basically the work was finished, but it wasn't polished and quite finished all the way. So maybe there was an added ending that should have been there, maybe not. Maybe he ended it the way he wanted to. Anyway, that's how we came to have the Aeneid. Oh. I think we'll talk about the Epicureans next time. So we can spend more time on the Aeneid. So, where are we? If you look at the outline of the book, the Aeneid, it has 12 books. Now, why do we call them books and not chapters?
Because the whole story was a book.
Well, and how did they store their information differently than us?
They're
today?
different. Each one's a different scroll.
Each one is a different scroll. And why 12? Because there are 24 books, letters in the Greek alphabet. And you would either write a 24-book epic, or if you ran out of energy, you would write a 12-book epic, sometimes even a 6-book epic. So he's very much in the tradition of the Iliad and the Odyssey. He knows Greek. He studied basically the whole Greek field of poetry, and it all winds up coming through his into his work. But the Iliad and the Odyssey serve a special function in that they supply the outline. So books 1 through 6 are the wanderings of Aeneas and his people, and therefore they are like the Odyssey with the wandering of Odysseus. Books 7 through 12, they have arrived on the Italian peninsula, and Aeneas promptly winds up with another guy's fiance, and a war ensues. So it's another little Iliad. And here we have the characters of the three men. Achilles who's known for his meanness, which means wrath. Odysseus is Polytropos, which means many twists and turns. So he's tricky. And Aeneas, Aeneas's prime characteristic is Pious Aeneas. They don't do a lot of rhyming in ancient poetry, but here's a rhyme. And this is his Virgil's favorite epithet for Aeneas, is that he's pious. And the word we get from pious in English is pious. That's not the best. I mean, what do we usually mean when we say somebody's pious today?
They're faithful to their religion.
Okay, they're faithful to their religion. Do we usually mean pious in a good way when we talk about somebody? I mean, you can, but as often as not, it's as much of a criticism as it is a compliment. I kind of like the translation. There's a thing in language called a false friend, where things look alike, like ambulance and ambulate. They kind of look like, but they don't mean the same thing, because an ambulance is for patients who can't ambulate to the hospital. I think we talked about that word before. And I like the word loyal better. And as a pious Roman, you had to be loyal to the gods, to your city, which of course is Rome, to your familia, to your friends, and finally to your own destiny, to yourself. Which is fine as long as these are all rowing in the same direction. But what happens when being loyal to your gods, being loyal to your family, or loyal to your city, and loyal to yourself, what happens when they start pulling in different directions? Then it can be a problem. You have competing loyalties, right? And that is how we wind up with Aeneas in certain kinds of situations. Now here he is. We don't begin with the fall of Troy. This is told in a flashback, or not a flashback. He's telling his story to Dido. And we see that at the beginning of his quest for a new destiny, a quest for a new city, he is a rather typical Homeric hero. Did we do, yes, the Homeric hymn to Aphrodite. How did Aeneas come to be? Well, Jupiter was tired of always being at the beck and call of Aphrodite slash Venus. And, you know, if you look at him from one angle, he's great. You know, I'm getting all this sex all the time. I'm a great hero. On the other hand, he's not in control of himself. His passions are. And if you can't govern yourself, how can you govern the universe? And so he gets a little resentful of always being on the leash of Aphrodite. And so he makes her fall in love with this handsome young fellow that you see draped over Aeneas's shoulder, Laertes. And they make the love and have the sex and have a baby, Aeneas. And at this point in the story, I mean, when we see Virgil writing about this point in the story, Venus is very much in the mode of a Roman matron. The Roman matrona would, you know, women couldn't generally wield power directly, but they could wield power through their husbands and sons. And so the Matrona would do a lot to try to foster the career of her son. And we see her doing that with Aeneas being one of his patron gods. And, making sure that he makes his way from Troy to Italy safely. She's ever mindful of him. So at the beginning of the battle, he shows up a couple of times in the Iliad as well. He's always overmatched, but always dauntless. Like, he's not going to give way. And I think the gods have to intervene to preserve him because he has a destiny beyond Troy. It's his destiny to lead his people west. And it's this part of the myth that the Romans pick up on and say, oh, of course, well, he founded Rome. The English do so too and say that, he came to England and set them up. And why not America? Let's go ahead and say he came here as well. So you see these competing loyalties at play. He is defending the city of Troy. And as long as Troy is not falling, then the rest of this goes along with it. If you're defending Troy, then you're defending Troy's gods, your own family, your friends, and yourself. But what happens when Troy begins to burn? He's ready to go down in flames with Troy. The prototypical Homeric hero, with a mind toward honor and, proving your manhood in front of the eyes of your other fellows. And then he gets a tap on the shoulder from Venus, who says, no, there's no way to win the battle. The city is lost. Now you have another loyalty. So if you can imagine scratching through the city-state, because that one's done for. Then what remains? The gods, the family, the self, and the friends. And you see him running back home. His wife is lost back here. She's supposed to be following along, Cruessa. Is that her name, Cruessa? But she's unable to do so. And he's loaded down as he can be. He's got his father, which represents the familia, but the past, right? He's got his son, and Kaisi. No, that's not right. Fui. Ascanius. Yeah. Remember what happens to Homer's son. His son gets thrown down from the highest ramparts of the city and dashed to death. And so he does not want this happening to his barely more than a toddler. And what is this right here? Or
Smoke.
What are these things here?
Statues, probably of gods.
Yes, the household gods, which are very important to the Romans. And so he is fulfilling his pious duty, bearing the weight of the future and the past on his back. The gods, his father, his son, his destiny to found a new city where these household gods can find their next home. And so this is very much the Roman hero that's starting to be born in this fire at this moment, which is why it shows up in art so much. It's a picture of what he is in this book, where Achilles is mostly angry all the time. Odysseus is mostly tricky all the time. Aeneas is almost always pious. Even when he's not pious, he's pious. Like Dido. Remember Dido, his friend? Friend, you're my friend. Well, why did he let her down? It was because he had a greater loyalty to all these other things. So his loyalty was in conflict. So mostly unlike Odysseus, he doesn't lie on purpose. He's not a tricky guy. And unlike Achilles, he's mostly not filled with anger, although at the very end he is, when he has the showdown with Turnus. So he's almost like a typological fulfillment of Achilles and Odysseus. You know, the perfect hero without their almost without their shortcomings. Yes, and as far as character traits of heroes, you know, like if I were to have to be stranded on a desert island with one of these heroes we've studied this quarter, yeah, P.S. Aeneas would not be a bad choice because he's not mad all the time, but he is very loyal. So we could expect him to be loyal to us and to actually get us through mostly alive, where Odysseus he lost his crew and Aeneas lost some of his crew. Oh, here we go. Died in 19. Yeah, author. Okay, so the mythology behind the book is that of Greece, but also the legends of Rome. You know, the work Livy was doing. I don't know that he had access to Livy, but he would have had access to Livy's sources. We talked about the unity. It has half the book, so it may be more than half of the length, though. It's a pretty long poem. It's a pretty long read. Yes, I would point out that the Aeneid is a literary epic. It's based in the literature that he had read, where the Iliad and the Odyssey were mainly songs to be sung, but they got written down somewhere along the way. This one, you need footnotes from the beginning. Do I have? Servius. Which Servius do we want to look at? So very early on, this guy Servius, who had access often to stuff we don't, wrote a detailed commentary, footnoting everything he saw as okay, here we go. Right. So here's page 1. And he will put a little bit of, oh, this is the eclogues. No wonder that doesn't look right. He writes this commentary. The one I like, I'm not seeing right away, so we'll just go back. What he does is he has a little block of the poem in the middle, and then all of these notes around it. It's quite astounding. But that's because this book was steeped in everything that had come before it. We begin with a storm at sea. Juno is angry because she sees Aeneas as getting away with it. She's still mad about the apple. She's the apple of discord. She's angry about Paris. She's just mad about everything. She wants to destroy Rome before it gets off the ground. Also, she sees Rome as being a a rival to her great city of Carthage. So Juno is going to be over Carthage, Jupiter is going to be over Rome, and Rome's going to destroy Carthage. Yeah, and we talked about patrons. Once the emperor meets Aeneas, Virgil, he really likes him and he likes his poetry, and especially because the Aeneid dovetails with the Augustinian project. He calls himself Caesar Augustus, Octavian does. And he sees the poem as glorifying the Augustan line and the Augustan. He doesn't come through and say, I want to overturn all of the traditions of Rome. After he becomes the most powerful man in Rome, he steps down from all of his offices. He keeps the consuls going, tribunes are doing the tribune thing, the Senate's doing its thing, but he's running it all. He's telling them all what to do. He wants to restore the trappings of ordinary Republican life. And so a work like this, to go along with all the great building that he was doing. Was he the one that found Rome brick and left it marble? I think that may be him. Okay, so let's talk about, by way of background also, his great enemy in taking over after Julius Caesar had been assassinated, after the Republican, the Senate conspirators had been put down. Then the guys who were in Julius Caesar's party, especially Octavius and Mark Antony, fell out with each other, which was a real problem for Octavius because he was not nearly as popular with either the troops or the people. He's a young guy, kind of cold fish, Jared Kushner type. And Mark Antony is a middle-aged guy. He's been with the army for decades, forever. And he's very popular with both his troops and with the people. We see some of that in the reaction to Caesar's death. If you've ever read Julius Caesar, I know it's 1,500 years later, but he kind of sticks pretty closely to his sources, that it's Mark Antony who's able to bring the people, rile them up and get them to go against the conspiracy. And so it looks like the deck is stacked against Octavius. But he has one thing that really works in his favor. And that is Mark Antony, for reasons we won't get into, winds up going east. And he ends up in Egypt and ends up in the arms of Cleopatra, who had, before him, wound up in the arms of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, in the middle of his campaign for world domination, winds up chasing Pompey to, is it Alexandria, whatever city they're in, and he besieges the city, and the Egyptians don't like being besieged, and they kill Pompey and deliver his head to Caesar, thinking Caesar will be glad of it. And he's like, you beheaded a Roman senator, a Roman consul? Are you kidding me? So he goes into the city, going to knock some heads together. I'm not sure if these were crocodile tears or not, but anyway, there's nothing good coming of that. In the meantime, he walks into the middle of a power struggle between two kids, the young Cleopatra and I believe her little brother, who is actually occupying the throne. And she wants help in becoming the ruler in her own right. So she has some courtesans, some prostitutes brought to her, and they teach her how to please a man because she's still a virgin. And then she has this rug delivered to Caesar as a gift, and they unwind the rug, and out comes Cleopatra. And I would show you this on a clip, but all my clips get like zapped on YouTube, so you can watch it. It's all over the internet. And so Caesar is smitten, and they have a child together, Caesarion. And then later on, Mark Antony shows up, and they have a torrid love affair too, which actually Shakespeare writes that one up as well. Although I don't think he does the Caesar Cleopatra, but he does Antony and Cleopatra. And so this opens up a line of attack to Octavius, who says, Mark Antony, great guy. He got bewitched by that Egyptian witch woman. And so in his propaganda, he always, associates Antony with Cleopatra, and she's the real one running things. If you were old enough to remember the 90s, you'd remember all the hysteria that accompanied Hillary Clinton, because she was a strong woman sitting beside Bill Clinton, and they would call them Billary. She's really running things. And same thing with Eleanor Roosevelt. Strong women freak us out in the patriarchy. And so the soldiers who love Antony so much, nevertheless, they don't want to be fighting for Egypt. They're Romans. They want to fight for Rome. And it's, and he says that he's defending Rome because he's actually at Rome. So in the end, he's able to overcome. But then Virgil writes this whole thing into the Aeneid and enshrines it forever. Which is what happens when we come to, well, it's still toward the first part of the book, but after some of their wanderings, they come to Carthage, and everybody listening for the first time knows that Carthage is the great enemy of Rome. It was kind of a destined by geography. I think that first one had it. Yeah. All right, so okay, so here is the here are the empires at the beginning of the Second Punic War. And remember that Rome at its height owns the whole Mediterranean Sea. But it started just running itself, and then it would kind of, concentric circle out, get a little more territory, now it's got Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, but it's still regional, right? It's not bestriding the oikumene, the inhabited world. Meanwhile, same thing is happening with Carthage, that its sphere of influence is growing and growing. And so they become rather natural enemies, seeking to dominate the Eastern Mediterranean, Western Mediterranean. And so it's not the gods that fate them to be enemies, it's their proximity to each other. They're so close, it's hard for them to share space. As long as the United States and Russia were happy with our little, areas of influence, that was one thing. When we both decided we needed the whole world, that brought us into conflict with each other. And so the Cold War. So that's something like what is going on here. And there were Romans that recognized this from fairly early on, especially Cato. who would end every speech with the saying, Carthago delinda est. Here we go. I guess that's supposed to be Cato. I don't know. He doesn't really look like Cato. And it means Carthage must be destroyed. So we need to build this aqueduct up in Umbria and pass this tax law. And oh yes, by the way, Carthago delinda est. Carthage must be destroyed. And by this time, of course, Carthage is well in the rearview mirror of Rome, but it was the last time they had suffered an existential crisis. And from then on, they've had this empire basically to themselves. The Parthians are way over by where Iraq is today. The Roman, that's why Rome spends so much time with civil wars. Their enemies are so far away. So here we go. Yeah, the Parthian Empire. This is Palestine. Yeah, Egypt. And so they do come into conflict, but you can tell they're way further away. They're around the Persian Gulf is their area. So it's more, distant trade than immediate. The Parthians aren't going to march on Rome. That's just not going to happen. And so in the book, these things wind up lined up against each other. It's almost the whole Herodotus schema. Rome is west, Carthage is east, even though it looked to me like Carthage was actually a little further to the west than Rome. They're basically the same, but he's saying these are the Orientals, the Easterners, and they're matriarchal, ruled by women. Rome is patriarchal, ruled by men. They represent the East, we represent the West. They are barbaric, we are civilized. All this is straight out of Herodotus, right? And so the minute that Aeneas hops out on shore in Carthage, everybody in the audience knows this is very ominous. This is like a multi-leveled, almost infinitely deep allegory, where Rome is an allegory for all these other things. Carthage is an allegory for all these other things. And they strike them up in the mind. And Aeneas tells his story to Dido, who's they're both single, and that's why Crissa has to die at the before the beginning, so he will be available to marry at different points in the book. And you can't do that if he's got a wife. And he's Pius Aeneas. He's not going to divorce his wife to make a better political match, which is what we come to next. So he's telling his story to Dido, and Venus, who is worried about her son, and remember, she's a lover, not a fighter. I mean, there are lovers who are fighters. She's not one of them. So she's not going to inspire her man to, greater warfare. For her, love is a strategy. Love is a battlefield. What song was that? And so she goes to Juno and says, we should make these two fall in love with each other. Why be enemies when we can be friends? And so Juno agrees to this with the idea that, if Rome never gets started, they'll never be enemies. They can be tagged into this, and Carthage will be that much greater. But for Venus, she's wanting to make sure that Dido willingly resupplies her son Pius Aeneas, and he can be on his way to finish his destiny. Anyway, while he is telling his story, Ascanius is sitting on the lap of Dido, only it is not Ascanius. It's his uncle, is that right? Yes. Venus's most famous son, Amor, also known as Cupid, who takes on the form of this little child, you know, the famous Cupid with the arrows. And it was a way of reconfiguring Eros in a less threatening style than we see in Hesiod. So instead of Eros coming first and then Aphrodite and then Zeus, now Zeus is the, you know, the dad of Aphrodite, or Jupiter, the dad of Venus, who is the mother of Amor, which is Roma spelled backwards. So we're going to deploy Amor to help out his brother, half-brother, Pius Aeneas, and he takes the form of his nephew, Ascanius, and while he's sitting in her lap, he makes her fall in love with this great Trojan hero, which takes everybody back. Everybody that's read or even heard the poem, the Argonautica by Apollonius. Yes, of course. Sorry, guys. Apollonius of Rhodes writes this story about the first great boat. The Argus, and so it's the Argonautica, and Jason builds it as part of a quest. He's trying to become the king of his town, and his grandfather doesn't want that, so he sends him on a quest. And he starts up with these, hey, this is a better cast than we have in any of our epics because it's the previous generation of demigods. It's Castor and Pollux and Heracles, and they're all on this boat helping row it. And they go up to through this narrow pass into the Black Sea, where in the Greek mind, and this is a Greek epic, and in the minds of the Greeks, this is where your barbarians live. They drink blood out of the skulls of their enemies and such. I don't know that they really did that, but you know, cannibalism to them was at the end of, you know, like I say, a barbarian's barbarian. An Egyptian isn't a barbarian because they don't speak Greek, but they're still civilized, right? But these people, can you even call them civilized? So they land at Colchis, and he says to the king there, could I have your golden fleece, please, to bring back to my grandfather, who will then let me rule? And he says, of course. Here are 3 tasks you will have to do, and they are totally impossible. How can any guy ever do them? Well, there is a barbarian princess, and again, in this story, Aphrodite goes to the assistance of Jason, and she gives a purple ball to her son Eros, who says, oh, yes, I'll be happy to help you out, Mom. And so he goes and he shoots Medea, the princess, with the barbarian princess, with one of his arrows, and then Apollonius says, love the destroyer burned in her heart. So you know that this story is going in negative directions. So you remember how I mentioned that I don't see a real Medea here. Maybe this one. Love the destroyer burning in her heart. And she looks a little aggrieved. Here's another one. These all look pre-Raphaelite to me. I was hoping to get something ancient. Anyway, After this, it becomes Medea and the Munchkins or something. These heroes, these greatest heroes ever assembled. Well, Hercules is peeled off for some reason. Castor and Pollux have gone off for some other reason. And from here on, everything worth doing that gets done by Medea, because she's not only a princess, she is a demigod. Her grandfather is Helios. Do you remember who Helios is? Okay, Helios is the sun. That's why we live in a heliocentric, and helium is an element that makes up a lot of the sun. So she's a demigod, and she's what we would today call a witch. She has supernatural powers. And also, she's just totally badass. Like, there's no limit to what she will do for her beloved Jason. And so they get the Golden Fleece. They're running away from town. And our greatest heroes in history to that point, they can't outrow the king. Her brother, king's son, has come along for this adventure, like, teenage kid. So she kills her own brother, chops him up into pieces, and puts him on like pieces of wood to bob in the water behind them. And as the king gets closer, he sees his son bobbing around in the water. Overcome with grief, he stops the pursuit to collect his son's dead body parts. That's who Medea is. So they do a lot of traveling. They eventually wind up back home. Grandpa, guess what? Still doesn't want to keep his promise. And so Medea comes up with a plan for that. She tells her daughters, okay, I can give your grandfather, make your father young again. All you have to do is kill him, chop his body parts up, that sounds familiar, and throw him in this pot. And to prove that I'm, telling you the truth, they killed an old ram, threw the body parts into the pot, and out came a young lamb. They say, oh, okay, it really works. They tested it out. And so they kill their father, and they throw his body parts into the boiling pot. But of course, Medea has changed the formula, so all they get is gumbo. Yeah, it was not good. But rather than Jason ascending to the throne, the people of the city are so outraged at their king being chopped up into body parts and boiled that they banish Jason and Medea, who wind up going to Corinth, which is about right here on our map. Oh, right here, the isthmus. So Corinth makes its money pulling freight across this little narrow neck from one ship to another. Anyway, the local king, and here we leave Jason and the Argonauts and go to the play Medea to pick up there. The local king has a problem. He doesn't have a son to take over when he dies, but this young Jason, he likes the looks of him. He likes the cut of his jib. And so he offers to make Jason his heir. But in order to bring that deal about, he wants to seal the deal with a royal marriage, because while he does not have a daughter, like a son, he does have a daughter. And so he offers the princess to Jason. Now, what about Medea? Well, they were never legally married. She wasn't Greek, and she was a barbarian princess. They're just kind of hanging out and having sex. She thinks they're married, but Jason says, well, it's a step up, right? So Jason tells her that she's, not only is he getting married, but she's got to leave with their 2 kids. And she just has a meltdown, just a huge, huge meltdown. And then she gets quiet. And she tells Jason, well, I know I have to go, but why don't you take the boys and I will give you some royal gifts for the princess so that they can stay. They're little boys. They don't need to be wandering around the hills of Greece in exile. And he thinks it's good. And she gives a crown to one kid and a robe to the other kid. And they go to see the princess, who's quite charmed, and says, of course they can stay. And Jason's very happy. And he sends the kids back home to their mom. Meanwhile, the princess does what the princesses do with crowns and robes, and she puts them on, whereupon it bursts into flames. And she's screaming in the middle of the court as she's burning to death. And her father rushes up to try to get this stuff off of her, but it's like napalm. It just sticks. Yeah, Dow makes a great product with napalm, basically petroleum jelly that catches on fire and sticks to your skin while it burns you. So it does like that. And it sticks them together and they die in each other's arms in this flaming fire in the middle of a horrified court, right? This is not the way they saw this going. And Jason runs back home only to see Medea above him. And this is a play, remember? So this is the Deus Ex Machina. She's in the machinery, the basket hanging overhead made to look like the sun's, Helios's chariot, the one that is usually on loan to Apollo to pull the sun along, but she's got the chariot and she's over him and he's raving at her, you horrible woman, calling her ugly names. And he says, but wait, don't go, where are my sons? Where are my boys? And she says, here they are. She picks the two boys up from the foot of the chariot and drapes them over the chariot dead. She has killed their own children because she's so angry at him that she doesn't want any part of him left. And he says, well, at least give me their bodies to bury. And she says, I don't think so. And off she rides to become the paramour of Theseus in Athens, because Greek men, they never learn. But the Romans have learned. And so when you've got this woman who is specifically based on this woman Dido, who's specifically based on Medea. Everybody that's got any knowledge of the Argonautica is instantly saying, "Oh my God, Dido is Medea." And so later, she's this barbarian. She's got witchy powers, and there's nothing she won't do for her man if she's happy with her man, or to her man if she's unhappy with her man. So Jupiter sends, what do we call Hermes here? Mercury to confront Aeneas and say, you are uxorus. Where is that word? Well, we see the English from uxorius. Uxorus is the Latin word for whipped. It means you're letting your uxor, your wife, boss you around. You're lolling around not doing anything. And actually, he was building the walls of Carthage, which is worse than lolling around not doing anything. It's making your enemy stronger. Says, you've got to go. So he goes, he's diddling around, getting ready to go, and Dido hears about it. And he gets this second follow-up visit, says, dude, did I tell you you've got to go now? And in the book itself, it's unclear why the urgency until you realize that he's tipped us off with this Medea thing. At some point, Dido's going to stop being sad and stop crying, and she's going to get quiet, and she's going to give orders, right? And she can destroy the whole fleet. She can destroy Rome before it is Rome, just these Trojan ships. She winds up burning herself, but that's because she doesn't burn the ships. Also, if Medea is so willing to kill her own offspring, then what about Dido with her lover's son Ascanius? He'll be doomed. There's no reason to keep him alive, whereas Medea had every reason to keep her children alive. So off they go. This also lines us up with Cleopatra. Remember, his patron is Virgil. Virgil has this systematic propaganda machine that he's aimed at Cleopatra mainly. Anthony, I love Anthony. He's a great guy. You want to have a beer with Mark Anthony. It's kind of a Bill Clinton type, right? Or George Bush, a friendly sort of guy that people like. People just respond to. Even Joe Biden, it seems like a guy you'd want to have a beer with, right? But that wife, oh my goodness, that wife of his, she's a witch. She's a barbarian. Imagine the people she will kill on her way to power. She killed her own brother to get to the throne. So she is ruthless, right? Like Dido, like Medea. And so this allegory, it's a great allegory, right? Super deep, super powerful, but it also fits very well with Octavian / Augustus's his own propaganda machine. So he's able to take this propaganda and make it into great art, which is what you find this with Shakespeare and the Tudor dynasty, where he writes endless plays, just play after play after play about the War of the Roses and how the Tudors came to power, and he's not going to draw them into question. And the guy that was the last king before the Tudors was Richard III, and he makes him one of his really great villains. And it's good. One of his first good plays, because he's got a really good villain, but the villain ties into the Tudor myth that Richard III was this hobgoblin kind of evil incarnate. And so we're doing that here as well. We're writing great poetry, but we're coming up with a way to do so that will make the emperor happy. The emperor loves this stuff when he reads it, or he hears it played. That's part of why he doesn't have it destroyed. By the way, again, this brings us back to our debate that we began with Plato, what do you do with poets? And next period, we will see that Augustus is definitely able to banish poets that write poems he doesn't like Ovid. So it's never that you get rid of poetry, it's that you keep the ones you like and get rid of the ones you don't like. And maybe kidnap movie stars from South Korea to make movies that you like if you're one of the kilns. Okay, so Cleopatra winds up, this whole showdown between Octavius and Antony and Cleopatra is central to the book. They forecast it, but also the book is kind of based in that. Like Carthage is Alexandria. Dido is Cleopatra. They align up, they align. And so he has this scene that he describes, the Battle of Actium, as they're predicting the future and the great things that will come. And in the battle, Antony comes into battle with Cleopatra, and he uses the word nephas. It's Nefas. It's a scandal that he's with this woman, not with his wife. He's got a proper Roman wife back home. He's not with her. He's with his barbarian queen. And it's barbaric, it's Eastern, it's matriarchal. Meanwhile, Octavius is going into battle under the shining star of his father, Julius Caesar, who was, promoted to being a star. They call it catasterism, where you die and you become a star. It's similar to apotheosis, which is becoming a god. And the Romans were rather cynical about this idea of attaining deity after death. It was something the Easterners did, but in Eastern countries, they saw their rulers as divine, but Romans are suspicious of their rulers, remember? And so there was this one emperor who knew he was dying and said, "Alas, I am becoming a god." He knew it was the end. He didn't believe that, but it makes for great poetry and it makes for great propaganda. So we've got the star of Caesar, and Octavius is going into battle that will make him the master of all the Mediterranean. Rome will now be, the empire will be reunified after this, and Cleopatra will be brought before him in chains, while the young Octavius is having her appear before him. He nevertheless refuses to look at her, but looks off to the side. Why? Why does he do such a thing? At least propaganda-wise. What's Cleopatra's special power? It's making powerful Romans fall in love with her. So Uncle Julius Caesar, he fell in love with her. Anthony, he fell in love with her. If she's in front of me in chains, she's still dangerous. She's still got that witchy power that she can spell me with and make me fall in love with her. So I won't look at her. Therefore, I won't fall to her charms. And I think she winds up committing suicide. So all this, you've got this straightforward story playing out, but all of these echoes, deep, deep echoes are going on here, which is partly what makes it such great literature. Okay, so they land in the Roman peninsula, the Italian peninsula. And it has been forecast that they will find their home when they are so hungry that they eat the tables that their dinner is sitting on. And they regard this as horrible, terrible. Oh my gosh, this is going to be just awful. And they get to Italy, and the locals fix them some food, and it's this flatbread with stuff piled on top of it. And one of the men is eating his flatbread supper, and he says, "Oh, look at me! I'm eating the table that that my food is on." And they all go, "Oh, wow, that's what that meant." And so they see this as the fulfillment of the prophecy. They aren't going to starve; they're going to eat pizza. So yeah, the Aeneid, we see early example of pizza. It's not exactly ours because they don't have tomatoes, but making flatbread and stacking stuff on it. That's kind of pizza. I could use a pizza. Kind of getting hungry. What time is it? And so they start making alliances. The Latins are there, and the king takes a big liking to Aeneas. I'm sure he tells him his story again, but this time it's not written down in the book. And the king says, "Oh, yes, I will give you my daughter, but what is her name?" Lavinia, Lavinia, yeah. So I will give you Lavinia, my daughter, only she is already engaged to one Turnus, who is really upset at having his woman stolen. These Trojans, they just don't learn a thing. And so the war on the Italian peninsula is sparked through the rest of the story. We get Aeneas fighting the locals to a standstill. He's able to finally defeat Turnus, and they will have peace after this. Then after the book leaves off, and this would never have shown up in the epic. There might have been some kind of ending, but you know, the showdown between Aeneas and Turnus, that's kind of the climax of the book. But the Romans know that afterward Ascanius will build Alba Longa. Romulus and Remus are born to this princess who this tall, good-looking fellow named Mars showed up. We've talked about this before. And they're raised by wolves. Romulus founds Rome, in the process kills his brother Remus. Then Roman history starts officially with 753. So Aeneas is all kind of a prequel to Rome being founded. Let's talk about the Roman art. This is in book 6, which is the end of the little Odyssey, right before the beginning of the little Iliad. And it says, others will forge breathing bronzes more smoothly. I believe it at any rate. So the Greeks, they'll make better art than you. They'll draw forth living features from marble. They will plead lawsuits better. You know, these Greeks, they make great lawyers because, you know, they lie so much. That was a Roman, you know, beware Greeks bearing gifts. That was a Roman saying, right? They will plead lawsuits better, trace the movements of the sky with a rod and describe the rising stars. So they will be scientists. So all of the stuff that, you know, we've been talking about with we talked about how this Greek had figured out the circumference of the earth with pretty amazing accuracy based on the shadow at noon. So yeah, these Greeks, they'll have tricks. You, O Roman, govern the nations with your power. Remember this, these will be your arts, to impose the ways of peace, to show mercy to the conquered, and subdue the proud. Hai tibi erunt artes, these will be your arts. So the Roman art is governing. They're proud of their laws, they're proud of their legions. Did we do the Monty Python thing the other day? What have the Romans done for us?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, so what have the Romans done for us? The aqueducts? Oh, yes, the aqueducts. Oh, and, you know, just all that other list of stuff, education, medicine. Of course, a lot of this, they're bringing, you know, the Greeks around with them to do the actual medicining stuff. But yeah, the Romans, they were proud of being able to kind of set up their government. The Pax Romana, the peace, the Roman peace, which was what Octavian saw as his great accomplishment. This is the Arapakis. Let's see if they've got a big version of that. It should be bigger. I guess that's big enough. So this is the Arapakis, the altar of peace that Augustus built to celebrate himself, but also the peace that he gave. And these are people on there. And you can see they make art pretty well themselves when they put their minds to it. But a lot of it's stolen techniques that they got from the Greeks. It looks very Greek. Now, Tacitus gives us another view of this Roman accomplishment. He says, solitudinem faciant pacem appellant. They make a desert, they call it peace. Which is what happens when you refuse to, yield to the yoke. Folks in Jerusalem, they didn't like having Roman overlords, although they had, a good life in part of the Roman Empire. And in the end, their city was destroyed, almost everything knocked down except the wailing wall of the temple, and it was sowed with salt. And then when they did refound the city for well over 100 years, no Jews were allowed to live there. You had to live elsewhere, because that's what happened when you rebel. They make a desert, and you can listen to us, or you can deal with our legions. Okay, I think that's kind of it. Let's see what else we got. Aphrodite, Virgil, Stoics. We'll talk about the Stoics next time. I don't know how we got through this so fast. I must be leaving something off. But that's the main stuff. I mean, most of this stuff are other lectures for my other. We talked about this. I don't know. I guess we could go early today. What do y'all think?
Yeah, that works.
Okay, well, I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Let's see what this quiz is about this week before you go, so you know what to study for. Moodle, my courses, 103. Quiz 7. Oh, weeks 7B through 8B. So this is what's going to be on it. Thought I made a little reminder to myself. Okay, 7B is Thucydides, ethics, this stuff, then Livy, and then Polybius. So the Rome stuff, the basic Rome stuff. But our next quiz will have Virgil and Lucretius and Ovid. So that'll be our last quiz next week. All right, any questions about that? Okay, all right, well, I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Let's stop the recording.